Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Gavin Lon Digital. I'm Gavin Lon. So at this point in the course, we have written most of the functionality that we wish to include for our application, for administrators, and logged on members of the system. That's great, but at the moment, when a user first accesses our web application, they are presented with a very bland web page. On the home page, by default, we want to present both an aesthetically pleasing web page to the user, as well as a page that entices the user to register to become a member of the application. So on this web page, we want to encourage the user to sign up or register to become a member of our web application or get in touch with TechTree. So basically, in this tutorial, we want to create a functional and aesthetically pleasing home page for users that are not logged onto the system. The goal of the content presented to non-members is to get the non-members to register with the system. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so that you'll be notified of future content. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage below in the description. It will be greatly appreciated. So, as already discussed in previous tutorials, our web application has users that can be categorized into one of three types. Each type of user is defined by the level of privilege they have in relation to the functionality available in our application. The three types of users can be defined as follows. A public user. A public user can be described as a non-member, i.e. someone who has not registered to become a member of the web application, and will only be able to access content that is presented to the user when the user first accesses the web application. From the web page presented to the user will be able to register with the system. This user will be able to see various courses offered by TechTree, our fictional company. Public users will also have access to information about TechTree. This unregistered user will not be able to access and consume any of the content related to the courses provided by TechTree. A registered user. This type of user has registered with the system and is a member of the web application. This user can log onto the system and consume the course content that has been matched with the relevant user. This user does not have the necessary privileges to create content within the system. An administrator. This type of user is a member of the admin role and is able to consume content provided by TechTree as well as create content within the system. At the moment, if we open our home index view that resides within the default area, we can see that a logged on user is presented with the courses that have been matched to the user in a collapsible list. When a user is not logged onto the system, currently the user is only presented with one line of text, letting the user know that the user is not logged onto the system. So let's create a partial view that will encapsulate the relevant content for users that are not logged into the system within the shared directory in the default area. Let's name this partial view _default homepage content partial. So let's go back to the index view. And in the else part of this if statement, i.e. where it is appropriate to include code to output content for a non-logged on user, let's write code to render our _default homepage content partial view. While we are here within the home index view, I'd like to tidy up the code a bit. We don't need to check if a user is logged onto the system using the sign-in manager object, because we are already doing this within the corresponding action method of the relevant controller class, which is of course executed before this view is rendered to the user. So we know that if the grouped category items by category models property is not null, then the user is logged onto the system. So, the next thing is if the user is logged onto the system, we want code to execute that will return the number of courses matched to the logged on user. So we can do this by returning a value from the count method like this. So we have already written the code in a previous tutorial that outputs a collapsible list of courses that have been matched to the user. So we need to write code that outputs an appropriate message to the user if the user does not have any courses matched to the relevant user. So let's write code that outputs an appropriate message to the logged on user if the user has not been matched with any courses, i.e., if the count method returns 0. Let's write the code for our underscore default homepage content partial view. So we are going to split the code that outputs our default homepage content into 4 sections in this tutorial. We'll create a hero section where we'll display a large image to the user. The next section will contain content that presents the courses offered by TechTree to the users. Each course will be denoted by a BootStrap card that will contain a thumbnail image, a heading, and appropriate descriptive text about the relevant course. The next section will contain contact details and a contact form whereby a user can get in touch with TechTree. The last section can be described as an About Us section and will contain a brief description about TechTree. The Hero section. So let's start with the Hero section. So in this section, we want to include a large hero image with appropriate heading text and a register button presented on top of the image in the center of the hero section. The text will briefly describe what TechTree can offer a member. The button will be labeled Register, which is self-explanatory. A user can click this button, whereby a form is presented to the user, and the user can subsequently fill out the form and submit the user's relevant information to become a member of the system. So, what is a hero image? So I found this definition online that I think sums it up quite well. A hero image is a website design term used to describe an oversized banner image at the top of a website. Sometimes called a hero header, it serves as a user's first glimpse of your company and offering because of its prominent placement towards the top of a web page and usually extends full width. For more detailed information about hero images, I've included an appropriate URL below in the description under the Additional Information heading. Note that all the images that you'll need to follow along with this course are available on GitHub. A link to the relevant GitHub location is available below in the description. The image that we are going to use as our hero image is named heroimage.jpg and can be found in the www.root/images folder. So within our underscore default homepage content partial view, let's create a div element that will contain the content for our hero section. Let's add 2 classes to the relevant div tag. We'll provide CSS styling code for these classes within the site.css file in a bit. Within the relevant div element, let's create an image element. Let's set its src or source property to the path of where our hero image resides. Within this element, let's include a BootStrap class named img-fuild. By including the img-fuild class, we are using the BootStrap CSS framework to do the heavy lifting in providing screen size responsiveness for our hero image. This simply means that our hero image will display appropriately on various screen sizes, for example, on a mobile phone screen, a tablet screen, as well as large screen sizes, for example, for laptop or desktop computers. Let's create a div element within our parent hero div element that will contain heading text and a register button. Let's include a class named hero-heading within this element. So within the hero-heading div element, let's include a h2 tag that will contain the relevant hero section heading text. So this text will be fairly large to capture the user's attention, as well as provide information to the user about the service that our company provides. So below the h2 element, let's include an a tag that will denote a register button. Let's give the tag an ID of hero register button. In order for our tag to be rendered as a button, let's include appropriate BootStrap classes within the element, like this. Note that I'm also including a class named hero-register-button. For styling purposes, I prefer to use classes rather than IDs, and I prefer to use IDs for functional purposes, for example, capturing the click event for a button, etc. So note, the hero-register-button class is our own class and not a BootStrap class. We'll write the relevant styling code in a bit. We can see that our hero image looks pretty good, but our heading text and register button are positioned below the image, which is not what we want. We want this content to be displayed on top of the hero image and to be aligned centrally, both vertically and horizontally, within the hero section. So, how can we achieve this? We can style the relevant classes appropriately within our site.css file. So let's open the site.css file. Let's write CSS code to include a reference to our hero section through the use of the hero class that we included within the relevant div tag. So in order to centrally align the hero-heading div element, I'm going to use relative and absolute positioning. The technique I'm going to use here is one of many techniques that can be used for centrally aligning content. So let's set the position attribute to a value of relative for the hero div element. This is the parent element for the hero section. Then let's include a class reference to the div element that we want to align centrally, i.e. the div element that contains the hero-heading class. Let's give its position attribute a value of absolute. So to align the content centrally, we can set the inset, margin, width, and height properties accordingly. So let's set the inset property to 0. Let's set the margin property to auto. Let's set the width and height values. These width and height values can be tweaked until we are satisfied with the layout of the relevant content. So note that in order to centrally align the relevant content using the inset and margin properties the way we are doing here, we must give the element that we wish to align centrally a width and height value. Note that I'm not going to go into too much detail explaining the CSS properties used in this tutorial. I've included relevant links below in the description for those who wish to learn more about these CSS properties. So the width and height properties are going to appear small for large screen sizes. I have deliberately set the width and height properties appropriately for mobile phone screen sizes. We are using the mobile-first approach to responsive web design. This simply means we write the code appropriate for smaller screen sizes first, i.e. appropriate for mobile phone screen sizes, and then later write the code for larger screen sizes. The BootStrap CSS framework also uses the mobile-first approach. So to make the content stand out for the element that we are centralizing within our hero section, let's give this element a dark but see-through background color. Note that the last argument passed here controls the opacity of the color. So let's run the code and see what we have at the moment. Let's set the color of the relevant H2 element to white. And let's set the font size to 1 rem. Let's style the register button. We are at the moment designing the button for smaller screens, so let's set its font size to 0.8 rem. Let's write the code to align the contents of the hero-heading div element centrally, both vertically and horizontally. So we need to ensure that the heading text and the register button are aligned centrally within the hero-heading div element, both vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to use the CSS flex grid to align the contents of the hero-heading div element appropriately. So to achieve this, we appropriately include the display property for the hero-heading div element and set its value to flex. To centrally align the relevant content, we can set the hero-heading class's justify-content property to center, as well as the align-items property to center. Let's run the code. That's great, but we want the register button displayed below the relevant heading text. So we can achieve this by appropriately setting the flex-direction property of the hero-heading class to column. By default, the flex-direction property is set to row. So we need to explicitly set the flex-direction property to column. Great. And then we can tweak the relevant CSS property values until we are satisfied that our hero section looks good on mobile screen sizes. If we press F12 and use Chrome's facility to test our design out on various screen sizes, we can see that our design looks pretty good on smaller screens. But if we look at our design on larger screen sizes, the centrally aligned content looks too small. So how can we make the centrally aligned content larger for bigger screens? The answer is, we can use media queries. So this is how you create a media query for mobile-first design. We set the appropriate min-width property for our media query to the screen size where we want the elements included within the media query to scale accordingly. So let's say that we want certain elements to scale appropriately when the screen size is at a minimum width of 800 pixels. So let's say that we are pretty happy with the way our hero section looks at most screen sizes. But when we look at what our hero section will look like at screen sizes for an iPad, the hero section looks too small. So let's say we are happy with what the hero section looks like when the screen sizes widths are between 375 pixels to 700 pixels, and also when the widths are between 800 pixels and over, but not happy with what the hero section looks like when the screen size width is between 700 pixels and 800 pixels. We can customize our hero section for screen sizes that have widths between 700 pixels and 800 pixels by including another media query above the media query that applies to screen sizes with a minimum width of 800 pixels, like this. We can then tweak the style-related properties relating to the items within our hero section until we are happy with the final result. So we have used the mobile-first approach for responsive web design in this example. This simply means that we first create code for designs related to mobile screen sizes first, and later create styling code for designs appropriate for larger screens. We have appropriately used media queries in our example to scale our content up for larger screens. the Courses section. So below the Heroes section, we want to include a section to display all the courses that are currently offered by TechTree, i.e. these are categories currently saved to the system. In the real world, we'd probably only display a subset of the courses currently saved to the system, say for example 8 featured courses. But because we are only going to be dealing with a small number of courses, for the sake of this example, we'll display all the courses currently saved to the system. As we know, courses in our system are stored as categories. So, a course is, for example, C# for beginners, Advanced C#, JavaScript for beginners, etc. These courses are going to be displayed to the user as BootStrap cards. Each course will be denoted by a card that will contain a thumbnail image, heading text, and a brief description about the course. So the first thing we need to do is update the home controller class so that the courses saved to the system are returned to the home index view. So let's open our home controller class within the default area. Let's look at the index action method in the relevant controller class. We are passing an object of type category details model to the corresponding index view from the index action method. So we have strongly typed the home index view with the category details model type. This is a view model user-defined type that we created in part 21 of this course. So this view model contains two properties. We have a property of type IEnumerable that is strongly typed with the grouped category items by category model view model user-defined type. So this property is populated within the index action method and applies to users who have logged onto the system. If a user is not logged onto the system, we want to display BootStrap cards to the user that represent the categories currently saved to the system on the home index view. So the second property within the category details model view model type is named categories. This property is of an IEnumerable type that is strongly typed with the category type. The category class represents our category entity. So, as you can see, in the index action method, we are checking to see if the user is logged on. If the user is logged on, we are returning data denoting the courses matched to the relevant user. This data is displayed on the index view in a collapsible list. We covered this functionality in part 21 of this course. So now we need to write an else part to this if statement, and within the else part, we want to retrieve those categories currently saved to the system that have at least one category item that contains content. So we are going to write a link query that queries the database for categories currently saved to the system that have at least one related category item that contains content. So let's wrap this link query within a private method. Let's name our private method getCategories that have content. So this private method returns a list of category objects. Let's write the link query. So we are querying the category table and joining to the category item table and then to the content table. We are joining the category table to the category item table and content table because we only want categories that have at least one related category item that contains content. So for the courses section of the home page, for a user that is not logged on to the system, we want to present the categories or courses to the user and not the categories along with related category items, as we are doing for when the user is logged onto the system. Remember, we are presenting a logged on user with a collapsible list containing categories and their related category items. We covered this in part 21 of this course. So the category entity has a one-to-many relationship with the category item entity. This means that if a category has more than one related category item, that more than one row of data pertaining to the relevant category will be returned within the results. So we only want distinct category-related data returned from our query. So we can use link's distinct operator to ensure that only one row per category is returned within our results. Great. So let's go to the calling code, i.e. the index action method, and write the code for the else part of the if statement. So the else part of the if statement must contain code to get the relevant data for when a user is not logged onto the system. So let's write the code to call our private method that returns distinct category data for categories that have at least one category item that contains content. Then we can assign the results of the relevant link query to the categories property, and this data will automatically be returned to the relevant index view. We wrote the code to return the relevant view and data in a previous tutorial. We can now write the code to display the courses to the user. So we need to update the partial view that is rendered from within the parent home index view for a user that is not logged on to the system. So let's open our _default homepage content partial view. Below our hero section, let's create a div element that includes two classes. One named courses and the other named section. Let's create a h3 element which denotes a heading for the courses section. So let's say that we want a maximum of 4 cards displayed per row. Remember, each card denotes a category or course. So if we have, for example, 8 categories currently saved to the system, 4 categories would be displayed on the first row, and 4 categories would be displayed on the second row. So we first need to calculate how many rows of cards are going to be displayed to the user in the courses section. So to do this, let's write C# code to calculate the number of rows of cards that will be displayed to the user in the courses section. So to get the number of rows, let's divide the value returned by the count method called on our model object by a value of 4. We are dividing the number of categories returned from the server by a value of 4 because we want 4 cards displayed per row. So next, let's create a list that will store the category data for each row of cards that will be displayed to the user. So now let's create code that loops through the number of rows of cards that will be displayed to the user. Now we need to write code that extracts the category data for each row of cards that will be displayed to the user. So we are going to use link to extract each row of cards pertaining to each iteration of the outer loop. Each iteration of the outer loop pertains to a particular row of cards. So we can use link's skip operator to point to the position within the relevant collection of categories, i.e. the collection of categories contained in the model object passed to this view. We can pass an integer value to the skip method to instruct link, as it were, to extract data from the passed-in index position, i.e. this value represents a position within the relevant collection. So we can calculate this index value, i.e. the relevant position within the collection of categories, by multiplying the outer loop's iteration count by 4. So the first iteration will have a count of 0, because 0 multiplied by 4 is obviously equal to 0. So link knows, as it were, to extract data from position 0 within the relevant IEnumerable collection of categories. Then, as discussed, we want to extract 4 categories for each row of categories that we want displayed to the user. So we can chain link's take method to the skip method and pass in a value of 4 to the take method. So in this link query, we are instructing link to start at a particular position within the relevant collection and extract 4 items from the relevant collection from the position argument passed into the skip method. So then for the second iteration of the outer loop, 1 multiplied by 4, which equals 4, will be passed into the skip method, which in effect instructs link, as it were, to start at position 4. Then the take method further instructs link to return 4 categories from the relevant position passed into the skip method, i.e. position 4. So for the second iteration, we are instructing link, as it were, to return 4 categories from the relevant collection starting at position 4 in our collection. If there was a third iteration of the outer loop, which would mean that there were more than 8 categories saved to the system, the link query would return a maximum of 4 categories starting at position 8 for the third row, and so on. So, now let's create an inner loop that will traverse the categories returned from the skip take link operations. I.e., let's write code to traverse the list for the relevant row of categories and output each card that represents a category to the user in its relevant row. So within the inner loop, let's write code to output HTML and BootStrap code that denotes a card. We know at this point that a card represents a category or course that is currently saved to the system. So let's test the code. So you can see here that I currently have 2 categories or courses saved to the system, i.e. the 2 courses are C# for beginners and Advanced C#. Note that each category has a thumbnail image path property, which should be appropriately set to a path where an image representing the relevant category should reside. If you don't yet have the relevant images downloaded to your computer, please navigate to GitHub, where you'll find the images that I've chosen for this web application. A link to this URL has been included below in the description. So let's log into the system as an administrator and add categories to the system, so that we can see what the courses section looks like when we have 8 categories saved to the system. We must ensure that all categories that we want displayed to the user on the home index view in the courses section have associated content. Each category that we want displayed in the courses section needs at least one category item that contains content. So for the purposes of this tutorial, we can simply insert superficial data into the system just so that the relevant categories show up as cards on our home index view. What I'm saying is our data doesn't need to be perfect at this stage. Each item of content can simply contain dummy data. So, to illustrate this point, let's create a category within the system. Let's create a category named Azure Cloud. So for the thumbnail image field, let's enter the path for an image that should exist within the relevant images folder to represent our Azure Cloud category. So now that we have saved our Azure Cloud category to the system, we need to create a category item for our Azure category. Let's create a category item named Introduction and save it to the system. In order for this item to show up as a card on our home index view, we must add content to this item. So as discussed, for the purposes of our example, we can simply add dummy data for the relevant item of content. So now when we log out of the system, we should have 3 cards presented to us on the home index view. Great! And let's appropriately add 5 other categories to the system so that when we log out of the system, we will be presented with 2 rows of cards representing the 8 categories that we have saved to the system. Excellent. But let's tweak the design a little bit to create space between the sections on our web page. So between the Hero section and the Courses section, let's add a HR element. By adding this HR element, we are creating a dividing line between the Hero section and the Courses section. Let's include a class for this HR element, and let's name this class section-divider. Let's go to the site.css file and style the section-divider HR element. Let's add code to create some space between the sections of our home page. Lastly, let's add an effect to our cards in the courses section so that when a user hovers the user's mouse pointer over a card, that a box shadow appears behind the card. When the user moves the mouse pointer out of the relevant card, the shadow disappears. This CSS code is just for effect. Great. The contact form section. So let's create the section for the contact form. Now that we have gone through the general idea behind how we are styling our home index page, I'm going to go through the remaining two sections fairly quickly. We'll be using BootStrap classes for styling our remaining two sections, which are the Contact Us section and the About Us section. So let's create a basic contact form. In the interests of saving time, I've already copied the contact form code to my clipboard, so I'll paste the contact form code here. Please see the relevant page on GitHub from where you'll be able to copy this contact form code. I've included a link to the relevant GitHub page below in the description. Let's run the code. Great! So let's create the code for the About Us section. And the code for the About Us section is very straightforward. Let's run the code. Excellent. So now that we have created our 4 sections, let's update the layout page in our default area with the links so that the heading menu can be used to navigate a user to the relevant sections. Let's make sure that each section has an appropriate ID attribute. A user can use the main menu to navigate to each section within our home page. Let's run the code. So we need to ensure that the Courses, Contact Us, and About Us menu items only appear to users who are not logged onto the system. Currently, if we logged onto the system as administrator or as an ordinary member, we would be presented with these menu items. We don't want this. So in order to ensure that only users that are not logged onto the system can see these menu items, let's move the code that renders these menu items to the _admin menu partial view. The menu code needs to be centralized within one partial view, but arguably perhaps _admin menu partial is no longer an appropriate name for this partial view. I'm not going to change the name of this partial view in this example, but note that our partial views should have descriptive names relating to the code logic within them. Let's create an else if condition here and check to see if the user is not currently logged onto the system. So, only when the user is not currently logged onto the system do we want the Courses, Contact Us, and About Us menu items displayed to the user. The last thing I'd like to do is to write code to fix the heading menu to the top of our web page. So when the user scrolls down the page, the heading menu does not scroll with the page and remains in a fixed position at the top of the page. So to achieve this, we only need to apply this BootStrap class to the layout view within the default area. Let's also include a class within the main elements so that we can create the appropriate space between the main section and the heading menu within the relevant layout view. Let's style the main element appropriately, like this. Great! For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing. And please ring the bell so that you'll be notified of future content. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and please share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage below in the description. It will be greatly appreciated. I really enjoy reading your comments, so please feel free to engage with me in the comments section. The latest code can be found on GitHub. I've included a link to the relevant repository below in the description. Thank you, and take care.